Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'm looking forward to our conversation today on what the heart of chaplaincy actually is, and really, really glad that you're all with us. For those of you that are new, I'll just do a little summary of who we are and make a couple of announcements to everyone. But just want all of you to know that as a chaplain ministry that is distinctly Christian, our mission is to restore chaplaincy to its gospel roots. And we do that by equipping, by training, endorsing qualified Christians for membership with our organization to join our team. So we, in our ministry, are unapologetically biblical, and we hold to and we teach from a Christian worldview. You can learn all about our membership requirements and our statement of faith on our website. And so I would encourage all of you who are maybe new to our ministry and organization that you will go and check our website out. Our chaplains include lay volunteers who may only have a high school or higher education, but they're mature in their faith. They're recommended by their pastor. They're committed to serving people and making disciples. We also train a growing number of vocational chaplains who are holding or are working toward a higher education, leading to board certification as a chaplain. And we're proud to teach to the common qualifications and standards of clinical pastoral education that was established by the Board Certified Chaplain Institute, but we teach it through a Christian worldview. We believe that our CPE program is actually the only one in the country that is doing so on the scale that we're doing it. Many others have been increasingly non-Christian and even anti-Christian in their approach to teaching professional chaplaincy. And the result of us being, I guess, so unapologetically biblical is that we now have a relationship with the Association of Biblical Higher Education, who recommends our CPE program exclusively to their many accredited Christian universities and seminaries. It's really, really exciting for us that that's happening. So if you're new to our ministry, we encourage you to read through our website, consider joining us and partnering with us for kingdom work, and also in supporting us for our growing financial needs because of the work that we're trying to do. Hope you're coming to our conference in September. That'll be 21st to 23rd. Again, details are on the website. And it's our first ever spiritual care conference. We're at over 130 registrations of 150 so far. So we're excited about the turnout, and we've got a couple weeks to go, and there's still time and spots for registrations. We'd encourage you to come to serving people in crisis, learning to bring his peace to their storms in Indianapolis. But we're also excited very quickly to announce our 2024 conference, which has been reserved and confirmed in partnership with Charleston Southern University's Dewey Center for Chaplaincy. That will be the first week of August 2024. It's called Being Salt and Light in a Dying World. And our main speaker, which will be our headline speaker for the event's been confirmed, is Dr. Harold Koenig, one of the most well-known advocates of spiritual care in clinical settings, and a very well-known researcher on the actual outcomes, measurable outcomes of spiritual care in secular settings for people. So join us in Indy next month if you can, but plan for sure on coming to Charleston, South Carolina in August of 2024. So now let's transition into our talk for today, and Dr. Browning is going to open with a little devotional and then go into a talk on helping us to consider what the heart of a chaplain is. Our good friend and speaker today is Jim Browning, chaplain, colonel, retired from the U.S. Air Force. He has a doctorate in ministry. He's a board-certified chaplain, and he is the director of the Marsh Center for Chaplaincy and co-author of The Heart of the Chaplain book, which we recommend to all of our chaplains. He'll be a plenary speaker at our conference next month on this same subject with a much more detailed version of this presentation. So you're going to get a flyby of the presentation to whet your appetite for what you're going to hear next month. While one may easily spot another person who we think has a chaplain's heart. It's difficult to define and measure what that is. So, Dr. Browning, I hope you're going to cover some questions like what are the tangible and intangible qualities of what makes an excellent chaplain? What are the imperatives that one must have? Does it start with God's voice embedded deep within our soul? Is that enough? Is there more? Is it something learned, or is it something we're born with? Is it spiritual gifts, personality, skills learned, competencies, experience? Or is it just another job and then we go home when the day is done? Or does it have something to do with what only a Christian can do, which is to be the keeper of the sacred presence who dwells inside the born again believer? And we bring that sacred presence into our spiritual care encounters. Dr. Browning, welcome, and tell us about the heart of a chaplain.
Well, good morning, Jim, and good morning, chaplains. And it's indeed my honor to be with you. I happen to be at my daughter's house where we are enjoying our grandchildren. I have a 10-year-old and a 6-month-old, two little boys here. So as soon as I conclude here, we're off to a soccer game this morning. And so what a privilege. Again, I'm in a little different environment than I am in my own office. So hopefully this is working for you well. What I'd like to do, and Jim, thank you for that great introduction. It's been an honor and a privilege to be a chaplain for so many years. I was a pastor for 6 years, two different churches. I did 2 years of clinical pastoral education before that. And after pastoring two different churches, I ended up going United States Air Force active duty chaplaincy for 28 and a half years. Retired in 2018, early in 2018, and Dr. Jim Spivey and myself started the organization that we call the Marsh Center for Chaplain Studies. I'll talk more about that here toward the end. But what I'd like to do now is really start with a brief devotional, and then because you'll hear in this devotional, really, it's part of what is being a chaplain, and that is engaging and caring for others. I've entitled this devotional, The Conversion of a Praying Skeptic. The Conversion of a Praying Skeptic. We all know that Jesus taught about prayer. We know that he taught about it's not the length of prayer. In fact, he said, don't be like the pagans that babble on and on. And he taught us that short, concise prayer that we call the Lord's Prayer. I love in Matthew 6, the King James Version, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us of our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. So my goal in this brief devotional is not to teach you about why you ought to pray or how you ought to pray. There's been some great helps along the way. I can remember being taught ACTS, ACTS, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. I still use that today. And there's those ways of praying, taking some of the prayers of the old saints, looking at some of the prayers that they've written. There's a lot of different ways. But what I'd like to do is not to teach you that you ought to pray or how to pray, but really just share a brief journey of my own that I must admit at the very beginning of my journey as a pastor, I don't think I was too different than most Christians. Before I became a Christ follower, I thought prayer was reciting some string of words that would contain a level of persuasion for the big guy upstairs. Our prayer was break glass in case of emergency statement, that when life was become chaotic or challenging. It's the child's prayer of being carried out of the sanctuary under the arms of a frustrated father who hollered, pray for me, as he or she was being dragged out of the congregation. Well, I must admit, I was not prepared for Mary, not her real name. When she came into my office, I knew Mary and her husband, Joe, again, not his real name, very well. They were a wonderful couple, members of our congregation, faithful to his church, and they became good friends to my wife and myself. I knew they'd been trying for some time to have a child. Mary confided to me that she couldn't have a child because of endometriosis, a condition where the tissue that normally lines the inside of the uterus grows in places where it thickens, breaks down, bleeds, and gets trapped in the body. For Mary, her condition was excruciating, and it prevented her from being able to have a child. Mary stated that they had tried numerous medical procedures to help her get pregnant. Unfortunately, nothing worked. Now she was ready to have the surgery that would relieve her of her pain, but forever end the possibility of them having a child. It was at this moment that I felt utterly ill prepared because she asked me to pray for them. What was I to say to Mary? What was I to pray? I knew at that moment I was a skeptic regarding prayer. Would it make a difference in their lives? Like doubting Thomas, my limited skeptical experience and understanding had led me to believe that prayers would not do any good. I would pray, for that is what pastors are supposed to do. But yet I was not convinced that it would change their circumstances. Yet Mary asked me to pray. She needed me to join her and her husband in asking God to intervene and bless them with a child. Against all odds, she was holding on to that slim chance that somehow they could still have a baby. I asked Mary for an object that I would use as a prayer reminder. I didn't want to be like so many who would flippantly say, I'll pray for you, and either forget or do a quick prayer to cover the commitment made to the person. My commitment to her was every time I consciously see your object, I will hold it in my hand and pray for you and Joe. She brought me a small, precious moment statue. It was a little boy holding the bottom end of an egg, and the egg was broken, and inside the egg was a little chicken. I placed it beside my computer monitor, and I was faithful to pray for Mary and Joe. Every time I saw it, I'd pick it up and hold it. I would tell you that experience changed me. Mary got pregnant, and they had a healthy little boy. He was born on December the 22nd. What a gift. What a joy. I was thrilled for Joe and Mary, and now they have two grown children. And yet the miracle is not that they had two children. I think the miracle was my awareness of God, that God loves to be glorified in and through prayers. It was not about the outcome, but it was the expression of worship through prayer. I returned the statue to them with a little homemade shelf and a placard with her son's name and birthday. It became a testimony of God's goodness and grace in their lives. The skeptic was beginning to change in his understanding of prayer. Years later, I was serving as a senior chaplain in a deployment in a Middle East country. I was telling the story of Mary and Joe as an illustration in a sermon. 2 weeks later, an Air Force captain made an appointment with me. He was about to return home, and he wanted to give me something before he left. I was wondering, why are you presenting a gift to me? I was about to politely refuse the gift when I discovered it wasn't a gift, but a request. The captain stated that he and his wife had been trying to have a child for a long time and wondered if I would pray for them as I prayed for Mary and Joe. He then proceeded to unbox a statue that was about 12 inches high. It was ceramic. My immediate first two thoughts was how in the world I was going to get this statue home in a deployment bag in transit. My second thought was, I'm no miracle worker. That story of Mary and Joe was once in a lifetime prayer experience. But I held my doubts to myself, and I assured the captain that when I got home a month later, I would set the statue next to my computer monitor, and I would use it as a prayer reminder for them. I prayed for them, and I would email them regularly that I had done so. About 2 months later, I received an email from him with a sonogram of what turned out to be a beautiful little girl. God once again taught me about his desires to be glorified in our lives. Please understand that my prayer as a praying skeptic doesn't mean that God is indebted to answering any of our prayers. The lesson wasn't about me and my prayers. It was about God and how I can worship him through prayers. And often God chooses not to give what we seek, but to be glorified in other ways. I rehearsed this lesson in my prayers with Velma, again, not her real name. She had COVID. We often sat next to each other in our Sunday school class. While driving alone in a car, I prayed for her in probably the most intensive, fervent prayer I've ever prayed in my life. Later, as I returned home late the following evening, God said to me through a Christian song on a radio, he said, I'm going to answer your prayer. I am going to heal her, but not on your side, but mine. She died 2 weeks later. Once again, God was glorified. To the Apostle Paul, prayer is not simply presenting one's wishes and desires to God. It is a way for believers to participate in the unfolding nature of God's redemptive plan in history. In a very familiar passage to us in Colossians 4:2-4, Paul reminds us to devote ourselves to prayer. And then he asked them to pray for him and his companions. And note that God may open a door to the gospel. Here's what he wrote. He said, devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving, praying at the same time for us as well, that God will open up to us a door for the word so that we may speak forth the mystery of Christ, for which I have been imprisoned, that I may make it clear in the way that I ought to speak. You know, the backdrop of this text was Paul was in prison in Rome. Notice that even in his trying circumstances, he asked for prayer, not for deliverance or even provision within his suffering, but to be alert for the opportunities to share the gospel, clarifying the mystery of Christ's redemption. He challenged his readers then and us today to devote ourselves in prayer, being watchful and thankful. That carries a sense of perseverance. It also is a posture of worship and of ministry. Here's somewhat of my point as a military chaplain. I've had the opportunity to pray for hundreds and hundreds of people. And what I learned is I would say to them, do you have an object? Often it was a military coin. Sometimes it was a Christmas ornament of a wooden soldier. Sometimes it was earplugs. It could be anything. And I would say to them, it doesn't matter what it is, but I want to take that object and place it next to my computer monitor. My commitment to you is that I will pick up that object, and from time to time, we'll see it and pick it up, and I will pray for you. And about every 4 or 5 times, I would shoot them an email just to say, I hadn't forgotten. I've been praying for you on a regular basis. What was amazing to me was the change of their attitude sometimes, or the change of what God was doing in their life. I remember one gentleman who, as he was walking out of the chapel, and I'd shared something about the prayer coins that I have, he walks out of the chapel. I'd never met him. He was a full bird colonel who had been there for an accident investigation board for an accident that we'd had. He slaps the coin in my hand and he said, pray for me, chaplain. And so I began to do so, and it was amazing to see his response to my emails. At first it was, thanks, chaplain. It's kind of a gruff and kind of, that was about it. And over the period of weeks, he began to open up his heart, and I began to see a change within his heart because of that engagement of prayer. I will tell you, I'm no longer a skeptic about prayer. It has become a fantastic opportunity in ministry. Let me conclude with this illustration. I've known of one person personally, who was a member of one of our chapels in Aviano, Italy. And another was the sister of a good friend of mine, who both died in childbirth. Every birth to me is a miracle of God. And yet I know that it is fraught with great risk. And so I would meet these individuals, obviously pregnant with, very extended in their abdomen. And I would, after engaging them, they would see the cross on in my uniform. So they knew I was a chaplain, and I would ask, when is your baby due? And, those kinds of questions. And, are you excited? And just engage them for a little bit. And then I would ask him, I said, I believe that every birth is a miracle. Would it be all right if I were to pray with you and for you? And I will tell you without hesitation, without even knowing that most of these probably were not even Christian, they would say, Chaplain, would you do that? And I'd say, well, if it's all right, you place your hand on your abdomen and I'll place my hand on top of yours and I will pray. My standard prayer was praying for the wholeness of the baby, safety for the mom, and then a bit jokingly, sanity for dad. I will tell you, it became a ministry. It created a holy moment, a reminder to them that God was present in their life. And it became a wonderful ministry for this chaplain. So I want to encourage you as you do your own ministry, let the heart of Christ, the heart of God shine through you in a multitude of ways. And one of those is in prayer. I was a praying skeptic, but not anymore. I've seen God work in miraculous ways in my life and in the life of others because he loves to be glorified. And so that's my devotional thought with you this morning. And I hope that will encourage you as you practice the art of being a chaplain. Let me talk about the heart of a chaplain. We wrote a book and we called it The Heart of a Chaplain. And so this is something that has been on my mind, my thoughts for quite some time. When Dr. Jim Spivey and I started the Marsh Center for Chaplain Studies, it really began with a single goal, and that is how can we equip, support, and advocate for chaplains in all settings? And we do that in a sundry of ways. And if you're interested, I encourage you to just go on LinkedIn and find us under the Marsh Center for Chaplain Studies. It's MARSH, named after Dr. Gerald Marsh, who was a lifetime professor at a seminary where I attended and was a two-star reserve Air Force chaplain, which is unusual, but a great man of God. I took almost, I think, every class he offered. He was my faculty supervisor for my doctorate. And so the Marsh Center, MARSH, is named after him because it's really his legacy. But I want to ask you a question, and I want you to come up and let's engage each other here. My idea for this morning, in the presentation I will do for Jim in September, I will go in a lot more detail. So today it's just a teaser. I just want to get you to thinking. And so I want to ask you a question. What makes a chaplain a good chaplain? So come online, come up with on your mic, and let's have some conversation here. I want to engage you and to facilitate. What makes a chaplain a good chaplain? And I'm going to call on some folks if you don't come up. So Gary, or Greg, I think you were the first one. And what do you think? Greg, what is it that makes a chaplain a good chaplain?
You got to have a caring heart.
Okay. Caring heart, like that. Someone else?
Hi, this is Naomi. I think we have to, of course, love and listen. Be good listeners.
Okay. I missed that first tiny bit. Caring heart and something about love and listen.
Yeah, just to have a loving heart and be open to conversation with our patients or with the people that we come across.
Okay. Okay.
I think definitely you need patience.
Mm-hmm.
You need you really the fruit of the spirit. I'm gonna put it in a broader sense. Yeah. You need the fruit of the spirit, all of it: love, joy, peace, that long suffering, all that compassion, the mercy, everything, all of that. And we need also to be guided, as you were saying. I think you mentioned it a little bit because I came in on the end. We need to be guided by the Holy Spirit. whether we are doing spiritual care or pastoral care.
Well said. Well said. The fruit of the Spirit, got it. That captures it very well. Well, let me. Someone go ahead.
I would say attention and concern for people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'd say dedication and knowing who we serve, meaning that we serve God first, others second, and ourselves last.
That's right.
So that dedication and putting your priorities in place where we need to be.
Well, let me ask you maybe in a slightly different way. And what makes a person an effective chaplain? Because, and Jim alluded to it, there are some that you will spot and almost immediately can say, wow, that person is a good chaplain or effective chaplain. Does that change? And here you could use really a lot of different words. We could use competent, compelling, practical, caring, good, impressive, useful, godly. There's a lot of different words that we can use here. But let me ask you a couple of different questions. And the first question is, could a minister be an excellent pastor and be an ineffective chaplain?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Why?
Absolutely.
Why or why not? Okay, why?
Well,
Why could you be an excellent pastor but not be could be an ineffective chaplain?
I think one of the first things is something that I wrote my thesis on,
Okay.
is oftentimes a pastor is effective at proselytizing. A chaplain should not. And that's one of the harder things for a pastor that transitions to become a chaplain. That's probably one of the hardest things not to do.
Yeah.
It is not your role to try to convert anyone that you're ministering to as a chaplain.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
And at the conference, we will talk more about that. Very good. Thank you.
Good.
I was
I
gonna
would say action.
Okay.
add to that. That was the first hurdles that I had to learn when I came into becoming a chaplain. I thought the chaplain was the same thing as a pastor, but I had to learn, and I continue to learn. You know, it's easy to speak to someone who has the same, let's say, Protestant background as you have. But what I had to learn was people who had no beliefs at all. That's what, and I continue to learn it today. People
Well, you're exactly right.
People without any faith at all in anything or nothing. Those are the people that I am after today, because
Yeah.
I've always been in the, whether I was in the street ministry, in the inner city ministry, the church is one thing, but to be able to sit down, I had to learn those listening skills and allow the patient until God gives the rapport that I need to make the patient feel better.
That's exactly very good. And I had the same journey as an active duty chaplain. I thought, well, I'll just be my denominational background is Baptist. I thought, well, I'll just be a Baptist pastor to the military. Covered. No. There's much. Well, let me ask another question then. So it sounded like you all agree that you can be a minister, excellent pastor, but an ineffective chaplain. Let me ask you a different way. Could a chaplain be a lousy pastor and be an effective chaplain? Just a real quick yes or no. What do you think? Can a chaplain be a lousy pastor and be an effective chaplain?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Can a chaplain be a lousy pastor and be an effective chaplain?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to disagree with you, because I think at the heart of a chaplain is having those pastoral qualities that are effective as a pastor. But you've already articulated being a chaplain is more than being a pastor. But I think if you don't have that kernel of caring for individuals as a pastor, and think about the pastor as a shepherd to the sheep. Think about not so much, from a church perspective, what a pastor is, but those pastoral care, that pastoral duties, loving and caring, being there in the midst of crisis. I will submit to you that you can be an excellent pastor and be a lousy chaplain, but I'm not so sure you can be an effective chaplain and not have that same kind of pastoral qualities. Not again pastoral duties necessarily, but what is it that? And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. Let me give you a definition that we used in the book. I believe it's on page 4, right at the beginning. I share a story in the opening chapter of the book. I'm trying to figure out what is a good model for ministry. And as I was going through clinical pastoral education, one of the old time chaplains there at the hospital where I was studying dressed pretty bright colors, crazy ties. And I thought, well, the hospital is a pretty depressing place. So maybe our responsibility is to help cheer people up. And so I sought to kind of get them to laugh and to cheer them up. And well, you know how well that went with my supervisor. You didn't like it. And I thought, okay, well, if helping to cheer people up, well, then I need to see what their issue is. So I became, asked 1,000 questions. When are you having surgery? What kind of surgery you have? And who, and all those questions. And they didn't like that either. And I'm struggling, and they didn't like me, and I didn't like them. And so one day I saw this part-time chaplain who covered nights. He was walking with a patient on my floor, and she was talking. And as she was gripping the handrail on the right, she was using her left hand to tell her story. And he was walking alongside her, nodding, and I was behind them. I have no clue what they were saying. But it dawned on me in that moment that the chaplain, at the essence of the heart of a chaplain, is sojourning, walking alongside, being with and present in, not trying to take their pain away, not having a quick prayer and a quick scripture to them, but one who sojourns with them. I called it for a long time, really kind of incarnational ministry. Is that not what God did for us? He sojourned with us to reveal who the Father was. And so I later called it the sojourner ministry. And to me, that is probably at the heart of being a chaplain, one who walks alongside. Well, here's our definition that we use in the book. Chaplains fulfill a sacred calling to accompany and to provide professional support and spiritual nurture for everyone in their distinctive secular communities, which authorize and hold them accountable. Let me say it again. Chaplains fulfill a sacred calling. And this is why I'm so pleased with Jim Kirtland and his organization of recognizing there is a biblical basis. There is a sacred. And that's why we in the Marsh Center is distinguished from some other chaplain organizations. We believe at the very heart of being a chaplain is we represent the sacred. We fulfill a sacred calling to accompany and provide professional support and spiritual nurture for everyone in their distinctive secular communities, which authorize and hold them accountable. I teach a class just on that. And in that class is, it's a 40-hour class, and it's really taking that definition and expanding it. And so I want to just give you a teaser, and Jim really articulated it very well in the beginning. There are a lot of different qualities and issues that's going to make a chaplain an effective, compelling, impactful chaplain. You can have a big old heart and just love Jesus and just want to sort of let that love ooze out unto others. But I would articulate, you will not be an effective chaplain if that's all you have. If that's all you have, because you need to understand the institution. You need to understand the secular nature. You need to understand that people that you are engaged with aren't members of your denomination, your church. They come from a wide variety of distinctives. They may have a religious expression very different from yours, or they may have no religious expression. They may be atheists, they may be agnostic, they may be Wiccan. They will be a reflection of the society. And so as you engage them, how do you do that in a way that is respectful and you engage them with dignity? You don't hit them with your 40-pound King James Bible and say, you just need Jesus. How do you engage them in a way that gives opportunity to share the gospel when appropriate, and in a way that is sensitive to the rules of the institution? And so these questions that we raise really in the book are really the questions that I think are getting at the heart of the chaplain. And I'll tease you a little more because I know my time is just about up. Each of the 6 major categories of chaplaincy that we articulate in the book: healthcare, military, corrections, corporate, public safety, community lifestyle. Each one of those have their own particular mission and ethos. Even in the military, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, Navy, and the Air Force, all very, very different. They have a different mission and a different ethos within their culture. And being a chaplain within those, you have to understand that mission and that ethos and culture. You have to know the rules, the written and the unwritten rules, the regulations. You have to know, the mission of your commander and all those things. And that's that secular community that you have to understand. You are not a pastor in a church. You are a chaplain embedded in a secular institution. And if you don't understand that secular institution and its language, and you're not going to be effective. And here's my illustration. If I were to take any one of you and just transport you into a different country where it's a different language, different culture, I guarantee you're not going to be as effective if you just were to drop in. But if before I dropped you into that culture, if I were to teach you the language, I were to teach you the customs and courtesies of that culture, if I were to teach you some of the history of the culture, et cetera, and then drop you in, you're going to have a much better chance of being effective in that culture because you've taken time to learn who they are and why they are and where they are. And that's true with a chaplain. You have to understand the institution. You have to understand how to speak your language as a chaplain, not in your own language, but you have to speak the language of the institution. And when you're battling for money and position within the organization, you will be far more effective if you know the language of the institution. We call it return on investment. It's how do you communicate what you do is being valuable to that institution. And so knowing the differences of those different types of chaplaincy. We also talk about the book, the importance of development. And I don't have time here, but you have to grow in your competencies. You have to grow in your skills. You have to learn, what it is. How do you deal with someone who's suicidal? How do you deal with someone who's in the midst of crisis? How do you deal with someone who's just lost, friends in a plane crash or a mass shooting or whatever it is? How do you engage in a way that you are walking with him in the midst of that chaos? Continuing development, and I'm grateful for Jim and his work, that they are looking at continual development of training, qualifications, and development. I believe that endorsement is important. because it shows that you are accountable to somebody else, that you have that accountability partner that will hold you with not just accountable, but also will support you in those trying times. We also talked about special issues, the legal issues, the social issues, the personal boundaries and the ethics of being a chaplain, the diversity, the equity, inclusion, the accessibility. When we worked with that, we we stated that there is an element of /L, DIA/L, and the L means for us, God's love. We look through all of those diversity issues under the underscore of it is God who loves those that are different and diverse. How do we equally love those in that same way? How do we also, again, understand the institutional life, the duality that we are both the chaplain, but we're also an employee, or it may be a contract position. How do we deal with that tension of being a minister, but also an employee of that company? In the military, I was a chaplain, but I was also an officer. And how do you wrestle with that duality of it? Finally, I know my time is up. There is the foundation of the spiritual foundation, the constitutional foundation, the historical. How do you operate within the roles and the different responsibilities of being in that chaplain? As you can see, there's a whole lot more than what this moment will hold. But at the core of the heart of the chaplain, and this is really the essence of what I will share in September. It is, if you notice on my shirt, on the book, it is the hurricane lamp. And the hurricane lamp is, I believe, we are ultimately a reflection of the visible reminder of the holy. If we don't have the sacred in our hearts, then I think we are just a dull light. But if we have Christ in our heart, then his light should shine through us. We become a visible reminder of the holy. And at the heart of a chaplain, I think it's that sacred calling. It's that sacred reflection of Matthew 5:16, I believe, where that we glorify him. It is the light of Christ that shines through us. So it's to be an effective, compelling, useful chaplain. I believe the heart of a chaplain starts with the light within you that shines through you. Well, Jim, I know my time is up. I've got a soccer game that we are going to have to leave to, but I invite you to pick up the heart of the chaplain. It's really, if you will read through it, I think you will be challenged with that question. What is at the heart of a chaplain? The resource, this was written by 37 different contributing authors, 914 years of experience. And that was really, when we titled it, we titled The Heart of a Chaplain because I think it articulates and captures what it is to be a chaplain. Thank you so much, Jim, for the opportunity to come to you today. I appreciate you and your organization. The Marsh Center, again, is just really is to build collaborative relationships. And I appreciate meeting Jim, I think 2 years ago, I believe it was, something like that. So I'm excited about coming to his event next month, and we will do a much broader presentation on this. Well, God bless you, Jim. I'm going to take off so we can make this soccer game here in Colorado, where it's much cooler than where it was in San Antonio, Texas, where I'm from. But God bless you guys. And Jim, I'm going to bail on you. And thank you again for the invite.
Thanks for coming, Jim. Good to see you. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks in Indianapolis.
Very good. And thank you for your class. Great discussion. You guys got some great answers. So hopefully we'll see you in September.
All right, my friend. God bless. Well, everybody, I'll stay on for a few minutes and we can do some Q&A if you like. I just love this man. He's just become a dear friend, and his book is excellent. We recommend it to all of our chaplains for continuing education. It's actually, this book is required reading in our students that are doing clinical pastoral education. It's one of the textbooks that we have them actually read.